communications after they join the single EU market. There are a lot of questions. Why would Ukraine need that? Who is going to benefit? What would be the advantages of joining this market? Why did we spend so many years to develop those regulations on the security of private data and cybersecurity and everything? So what are we gonna get? What Ukraine is gonna get from joining the EU digital market? Because there have been a lot of questions from businesses. They don't see the benefits at the moment. So maybe Yulia can give us a short intro lecture for them. What are they going to get apart from those threats related to the increase of the competition? So thank you, Yulia. The floor is yours. Thank you, Lilia. Thank you for the invitation. I will try to answer your question. But before that, I'll talk a little bit about those milestones that led us to this dynamic cooperation with the EU that we have today. Today, we are reforming ourselves very dramatically and fast. So we continue to perform the systematic work to implement the association agreement and the roadmap to integration of Ukraine to this single digital EU market, to be able to introduce the internal market in the area of telecom services. I remind that Ukraine and the EU have updated the agreement on station in due regard with the changes that took place. And we set this agenda between Ukraine and the EU that requires certain amendments, legal and others. I will remind what the roadmap is about. Is an obligatory mechanism for Ukraine to join the internal digital market with the EU that is covered by the association agreement. We developed that back in 2018, and then we started a multi-stage process of assessment by the European Commission. Stage one is the internal assessment that took 10 months and is now over. The second stage, that was the comprehensive assessment here in Ukraine. So we had the European mission working in Ukraine that were assessing whether we are close to European standards and whether we have any sufficient institutional capacity. And the stage three is kind of development of a joint vision of next steps. We have done that already, and I will tell you what's all about later. So the roadmap is kind of flexible instrument that we update every year to take into account the most recent changes in the EU. And the responsibility for the implementation of the roadmap that contains about 200 tasks, and this responsibility lays with 29 public authorities. There are three pillars there: electronic communication, institutional capacities, and the trusted services. In the area of electronic communications, we all know that there was a law on electronic communications adopted that implements the European code of e-communications, and we do that jointly with the EU nations. We also expect the law on regulator to be passed soon. I hope it's going to be passed very soon. There is a big amount of work for the implementation of a joint working plan with the EU to recognize the mutual trusted services in case appropriate agreements are signed. And we hope that with joint efforts, we will achieve necessary standards requirements to make it happen. The parliament now has a number of draft laws registered that are designed to achieve full equivalency with the EU in this area. So these are the major elements related to the legal institutional pillars. And now back to your question, why are we doing that? What is the end goal? Because reforming for the sake of reforms it's not a goal as such. So what is the actual result that we expect? Introduction in Ukraine of the latest standards of trusted services, electronic communications, and in other sectors. That's number one. And other services like e-commerce, protection of intellectual property online, cybersecurity, digital education, protection of private data. These are the results that we try to achieve. We don't restrict ourselves only to the association agreement with the EU because it was signed back in 2012 and the digital era is developing fast. We need to take those changes into account, and the association agreement is not a flexible instrument. Unfortunately, that can be changed every year. We understand that. So our strategic goal is to integrate fully into the European digital market that will contribute to digital transformations within the country and will help to uncover new opportunities for Ukraine, for its businesses. We hope that that will contribute to development of digital economy in general, to cross-border trade and digital innovations, which means the bilateral contracts can be signed, the e-invoices can be used, the cross-border payments can be effected that will increase the better access for consumers. And they will give Ukraine access to digital services and goods that are available in EU. Ukrainian companies will be able to provide digital services in the EU and vice versa. European companies can provide those services in Ukraine on the same conditions, on the equal conditions, which means that it will simplify the exports and inputs thanks to the use of single principles and standards with the EU and ensure interoperability of electronic identification services. And that will enable to jointly use the single uniform digital infrastructure. I mean, these connect your facility blocks, delivery, customs, logistics, and others. The digital technologies are getting more important in the EU. That's why integration into the European space will benefit our general trade with the EU, and that will be good for the economy of Ukraine, for every industry. I remind about an interesting research, very useful research that took place with help of Digital Transformation Ministry. What I'm talking about is not a dream. We have this research in place conducted by the leading Ukrainian economists, and they calculated with help of economic models the benefit after the integration to the EU market. This was the first, this quantitative research, and this is the ground for certain decisions in the country. And it shows that this is going to be the major driver of economic development of Ukraine. You can check it out on the website of the ministry. So the research shows that this regulatory harmonization will help to avoid certain barriers and lead to better integration, and that will increase the welfare of citizens of Ukraine. We received a very interesting number in the research that according to the most optimistic scenario, I mean, if we roll out all those reforms with the companies that I mentioned, we can increase the GDP to 12.1%. So this is quite an ambitious number. So the research says from 2 till 12.1, so percent. But this is the optimistic scenario. If we roll out all the reforms and we have the single market with the EU in this sector. Also, according to the results, the integration into the EU market will have a positive result, not only for Ukraine, but for the EU too. And that will increase the sales for both countries. The potential benefits will depend, obviously, on the scale of regulatory and digital transformations in Ukraine. And the sooner and the more effective we implement those changes, the faster we can integrate into the EU. And for the business, I want to emphasize the following. If we have this internal single market with Ukraine, there is no country that is not part of the EU that is member of this space. So now it works for the EU only. And those, because they have standards, pro-European standards at the very beginning. For us, it takes some efforts to get closer to them in terms of regulation and so on. So when we implement reforms and when we have access, the same access as EU nations have, we can take advantage of this opportunity and or win or not. And that will depend obviously on every business, every company.
So what does the state have to do? It has to create opportunities to access bigger regional and global markets to expand, business activities by companies here in Ukraine. That's speaking of opportunities. Now, this also comes with more responsibility. And, the market itself will demand higher standards of service delivery, but I think we're doing okay with this in Ukraine, and I think the services provided by operators currently are of a high quality level. If I have a few more minutes, I would like to say a few words about our future steps. Yes, please. So what are some of the future steps and way ahead in order to ensure full integration with the European electronic communication market? Well, first of all, accomplishing reforms in the field of electronic communication, finalizing those reforms, including passing of the law of Ukraine and its actual implementation, which means passing bylaws and secondary legislation, which only makes sense. According to European law, implementation is not just passing the act, but it's actually creating mechanisms envisaged by the act and deploying those mechanisms across the board. So, obviously, finalizing the accomplishment of missions and objectives according to the association agreement and the roadmap. It's a very flexible tool that is being renewed on an annual basis. And the mutual cooperation plan regarding electronic trust services. Well, then, yes, another prerequisite, major prerequisite is the continued support of the EU. And, we've been receiving a lot of positive signals and messages and a lot of support from the European Commission lately. And, this is the only sector under the association agreement that has enjoyed so much support in terms of resources, funding, and people to help implement these reforms. And the third major factor is working with the European Commission. And, this is something we've already started doing, and, some consultations have already taken place, and, something to think about. Anyway, achieving some sort of an agreement on the vision, the future vision, or the algorithm, when it comes to the actual operation and functioning of this joint market of Ukraine and EU. So what this means is that currently this um, uh, cooperation happens through association agreement bodies, the trade committee, the summits, and other bilateral entities. So those are sort of general mechanisms encompassing all those different sectors and spheres envisaged in the association agreement. So if one of those sort of areas kind of moves ahead and achieves the single market, then in that case, there are arrangements in place to create actual mechanisms for this area to actually function, for this market to function. So all the internal procedures. So which is quite complicated. If you look at European economic area, there's a sort of a court system there. You have Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. The countries that provide this opportunity for the surveillance authority to exist and operate effectively, to make sure that the internal market exists and operates in an unimpeded nature, so that there is a court authority, right? And so that is there to settle all those issues, between two sides. So, this is a big issue for us, and hopefully it will become even more prominent going forward, so I guess this is something that needs to be addressed. So yeah, very briefly, this is some information about, some of the future steps we will be taking to achieve the maximum possible integration into European market. Thank you for your attention. Well, yes, a couple of months ago, there was a big study on the digitalization of the three C's. So if you heard of this initiative, well, the European countries, so-called three C's country, Poland, Latvia, Estonia, so Baltic states, and a number of others, right? They have come up with this initiative that's called the Three C's initiative. So, in fact, Ukraine has already become a part of some of the sort of streams and processes within this initiative. So this whole initiative is run as a project. Countries declare their intent to participate. One country then goes ahead and assumes control, and then requests the EU to provide funding in support of some initiatives. So, what could be interesting for Ukraine? And that's exactly the reason why we invited people working in the transportation, road construction, railways, etc. So one of those projects is called Via Baltics, or Rail Baltics. It was a transboundary 5G project. So run by Lithuania. They've already developed terms of reference, some technical documents. Latvia and Estonia have declared their intent to participate. So Ukraine could join the project as well. Estimated budget is 27 million euros, and some additional investment is expected as well. So the European Union. So let's talk about the investments that EU have made. So SEF2 program for 21-27, 3 billion euros to support investment in digital connection infrastructure. And part of it actually goes towards creating these broad 5G corridors along major highways and railroads. So I think Ukraine is this is something for Ukraine to think about. I mean, because it would be pretty painful for travelers to all of a sudden lose connection to internet when driving along a Ukrainian highway or traveling in a train. So while there is internet, it's not very usable, really, right? So that is something we need to consider and think about. Building those corridors, 5G corridors. So hopefully we'll have somebody from the Ministry of Digital Transformation to speak about this. And I think we need to understand that uh, Ministry of Digital Transformation is pushing all these initiatives not because it wants to, it's because Ukraine needs it. And I think it's programs like that that can help Ukraine shore up some gaps that Ukraine still has in some of those areas. And although there are some plans, but no specific concrete steps have been taken towards achieving these goals. But that's something we need to think about. And that's exactly the reason why we're here today. For example, to make sure that the cybersecurity law, for example, already when passed, contains European provisions, European concepts, and there's no other choice but to take into account NIS directives 1 and 2. Number 1 has in fact been transposed into Annex 7.3 to the law. So yeah, I mean, it is effectively there, which means Ukraine will have to operate in accordance with wider European standards. So yeah, I was looking at this 3Cs initiative, and I thought to myself at some point that where there's a wish, there's a way. If Ukraine wanted to, it could have participated in some of those projects big time. And Ukraine has declared some intent to participate in some of those projects, on UAVs and drones and some other things as well. But we definitely need more. And I see Kirill wants to join because I mean that's the topic he cares about, and I will let him speak at some point. But yeah, but I think Ukraine could do a better job in terms of showing more willingness to participate in digital communication security related projects. So thank you, Unit, for your participation. And I would like to thank you for the tremendous work you have done, and the work that sometimes happens in a shadow, out of sight. Just think about Annex 7.3. When did the negotiations start? In 2017, and now it's 2022. So 4 years just for one annex, right? And there are many more of those annexes, and all of them need to be looked at. Things like personal data protection. That's not something that you'll find in any of those annexes, but it is a part of the agreement itself. So something that needs to be fulfilled by Ukraine. So hopefully, we will continue this fruitful cooperation together, and then at the end of 2022, we'll raise a glass of wine, and we'll drink personal data protection arrangements finally having been put in place, and I will do everything I can on my end, and I know Yulia will do just as much, and hopefully, we won't have any major interruptions or impediments, because this is what gives you access to European Union investments and funds and instruments. Thank you.